We'll start with a story and what's important to me and how I realized that it was important to others for the same reason it was important to me as a Roman Catholic. So that's the first point of departure here. I started the work on interfaith when I was studying my MDiv with the Jesuits at Regis College, and it was the first moment I realized that faith was a cause for so much kind of internal anxiety for people who had never encountered that difference. I come originally from Colombia, and in Colombia there is a lot of different cultural difference, even though people think that we're all the same. And that was, I kind of underappreciated that feature of the place in which I was born, the great diversity that I experienced. And when I came here to Toronto, I assumed I was coming to a great place of encounter, of pluralism, of diverse religious encountering one another. But in many ways, you are able to live your faith life in isolation from others. And in public spaces, you don't talk about religion. And when you study theology, you realize that you're running against that all the time. That the kind of conversation that you can have about faith in settings in which people are starting to either be religious leaders or theologians is not a conversation that is welcome in social contexts, in political dialogue, in etc. Part of all of that was the fact that we were working on social justice initiatives, which meant that we were working with people from other faith traditions and non-faith tradition in projects that advocate for the common good. And when we were forced to articulate what we were trying to do and why we were doing it, then we realized that the motivations were actually quite different, and that they were faith origin. And people started trying to navigate those discussions without having any interreligious literacy. They were used to be working together, but not to dialogue about the motivations behind their work. And that just naturally evolved into us trying to talk about religious difference. With no luck. Like there were many dead ends to that, to those dialogues that emerge out of just the necessity of our pastors' information and people that will work in relief information, and then come into the same space and trying to talk about religious differences and just reaching platitudes all the time. Oh, we're all one family. We're all human. This is the human condition, and that seemed to get us nowhere. And that was the moment when I realized that deeper dialogue was needed. It was through that work that I ended being connected to Scarboro Missions. Scarboro Missions was a religious community, a Catholic religious community here in Toronto. And their story is fascinating because it was the full name of Scarboro Missions is Scarboro Foreign Missions. And its original name at the turn of century, between the 19th and 20th century, was China Missions, Scarboro China Missions. And their goal, like any religious community of priests that does missions, was to evangelize, to convert people in China to Christianity. In their experience in China, they realized that they would put it this way: they had nothing to teach the Chinese people they were interacting with. They were learning from them, and that the type of interaction that they were setting up was fraud, that they needed to have other tools to show what perhaps they could do for the communities they were approaching, but also to learn from them. And they developed all of these theology of interreligious dialogue that eventually formed a number of curriculum pieces that are now used particularly in the Catholic schools in Toronto and in Ontario for the world religions class that most people take in grade 11. So they created also an interfaith office, an interfaith department that was operative for about 70 years. They closed recently. And through my involvement at Religious College, I was connected with them, and I ended up working in that setting. And it was out of necessity. It was out of trying to source things for the other projects I was working in that were projects that had to do with social justice, environmental justice, social transformation. But I ended up being completely immersed in dialogue itself. That was a goal on its own, because people needed the literacy to be able to talk to one another, because people needed to develop a disposition that was different from the one that we culturally have here, which is we listen to speak, and we listen to critique, to have our say. And for them, and all the curriculum they developed was around attentive listening. Dialogue was about kind of putting yourself in, suspend yourself, your own judgment, your own perception, and then allowing the other to speak and to exist in front of you. And out of that exposure, you will get some sort of head start to be able to reattune yourself to the difference. So basically, that's the work they did, and I just witnessed that over 10 years or so that I was connected to them. And then that was kind of the spirit that I brought into other things. So through my involvement there, I started working with the Christian-Jewish Dialogue of Toronto, the Canadian Interfaith Conversation, and the North American Interfaith Network. All of them loose networks of collaboration across religious divides. And one of the reasons why I say loose is because none of these networks is really kind of a very grounded enterprise. It always depends on the people that are there at a given time. It morphs with the needs of the times, and it also they are very fragile because there is very, very little institutional support to these initiatives, because people want to support their own faith traditions, their own projects, but collective projects tend to be a bit more precarious. So those networks were great, and ways of seeing how all of these worked at different levels and for different reasons. So the North American Interfaith Network has always wrestled with the idea of what it means to be a person of faith in North America, but a person of faith that is not advocating for only one's own faith tradition, but a person of faith that advocates for a society that is more human, that advocates for change, that integrates the principles that allow people from different backgrounds to subsist within the same social spaces. With the Canadian Interfaith Conversation is something similar, but in the context of Canada, trying to understand what it means to be diverse in Canada, what it means to be not just religiously diverse, but just ethically diverse in Canada. How a place like Canada that claims to be pluralistic can actually become pluralistic and not just be it'd be like pluralism that exists within some Christian structures. And in the Christian-Jewish Dialogue of Toronto is the connection to religious hate, particularly anti-Semitism, but we did a lot of work on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, trying to understand how different religious communities have disproportionate power relationships to one another, that it is not different communities don't approach the difference at the same level. If you're Jewish in a place in which you're a minority, you are at risk because of all the hatred that has been accumulated in Christian history towards Jewish people, both biblically and through other traditional texts that are built onto that. But something similar with Islamophobia, the fact that when you're a Muslim minority within a majority Christian context, there are all these stereotypes applied to you, connected to particularly recent history in North America. So anyway, all of that being like different little sections of the work that I've done and how they've integrated in what I understand as important for dialogue. So really overcoming some of the religious hate and hatred, and how the lack of tolerance for religious diversity is something that is sometimes fueled by secular structures that don't recognize that they have a Christian background. And being a Christian in that context, I do feel complicit with the harm that is done to minorities. So I know that I can't do anything about addressing that, but being involved in that at least keeps me aware of the damage that is being perpetrated, and hopefully try to promote the initiatives that try to stop it.